He came to buy a rifle. That was the only arithmetic that mattered in the heat-soaked town of Redemption. Abel calculated the miles he had ridden, the dust he had swallowed, and the weight of the coin in his pocket against the true, satisfying heft of a new Winchester. The last one had been lost in a rock slide up near the Cimarron, a loss that felt like misplacing a part of his own arm. Now, he stood before the only gunsmith for 100 miles, a faded sign proclaiming a Finch's Fine Arms and Repairer. The bell above the door gave a thin, weary jingle, a sound swallowed by the thick, oppressive silence of the July afternoon. The air inside was close, smelling of gun oil, brass shavings, and something else. Something stale and anxious. A small, balding man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from a workbench. This was Finch. He had a smile that did not reach his eyes, a shopkeeper's smile practiced in a mirror. "Help you, friend?" he asked, wiping his hands on an already soiled apron. "Looking for a rifle," Abel said. His voice was low and gravelly, a voice that did not waste words. "Winchester. A 73, if you have it." Finch's smile widened a fraction. "A man of taste." "Indeed, I do. Just got a beauty in last week. Barely used. Smoothest action you'll ever feel." He gestured toward the back of the cramped shop. "Have a look at the long guns on the wall. I keep the special stock in the gear closet, away from the dust. Let me just." But Abel was already moving. He preferred to see for himself, to feel the balance of a weapon in his own hands, not to be sold on it with pretty words. He walked past racks of pistols and shark guns, his spurs making a soft, rhythmic clink on the warped floorboards. The gear closet door was slightly ajar. He reached for the simple wooden knob, his mind already on the checkered walnut stock, the cold blue steel of the barrel. He pulled the door open. It was not a rifle that met his eyes. It was a woman. Or a girl, it was hard to tell. She was huddled in the corner between stacks of leather holsters and boxes of ammunition, trying to make herself small enough to disappear. She was Chinese, her face a constellation of fresh bruises and older, faded scars. Her black hair was a tangled mess, and she wore a traditional grey cheongsam, but it was tattered, stained, and clung to a frame that was far too thin. Her feet were bare, tucked beneath her, the soles dark with grime and dotted with cuts. When the light from the shop hit her, she flinched and squeezed her eyes shut, a soft, wounded sound escaping her lips. She was bleeding from a cut on her temple, a slow, dark trickle that she did not bother to wipe away. She looked like a trapped animal, braced for a blow that had already landed 100 times before. The stale, anxious smell in the shop was her. It was the smell of fear. Behind him, Finch made a flustered noise. "Ah, that's Ling. My help. Clumsy girl. Always hiding. Pay her no mind." Abel did not turn around. He did not take his eyes off the woman in the closet. He saw the way her hands trembled, the way she held herself perfectly still, as if hoping that stillness would render her invisible. He had seen that kind of stillness before, in deer just before the hunter's shot, in men just before they broke. He slowly raised a hand, palm open, a gesture meant for a spooked horse. She flinched again, pressing herself harder against the wall. The arithmetic in his head shifted. The weight of the rifle, the dust, the miles, it all fell away. A new calculation took its place, one with stakes he hadn't anticipated. He took a slow step back, pulling the closet door gently closed, giving her back the darkness. Then he turned to face Finch. The shopkeeper's practiced smile was gone, replaced by a tight, wary line. Abel walked to the front door of the shop and turned the lock. The click was loud in the sudden, heavy silence. He then turned the sign in the window from opener to closed. Finch's eyes widened. "Now what's all this?" "I've got business to." "Your business can wait," Abel said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a final judgment. "You and I are going to talk. And then you are going to leave." Finch sputtered, a flush rising on his pale neck. "You can't, you have no right." Abel didn't draw his pistol. He didn't need to. He simply stood there, a tall, unmovable shape between the gunsmith and the door to the back room. "I came for a rifle," he said, his voice flat. "But I think I've found something else that needs my attention." He took a step toward Finch, and the smaller man flinched, just as the woman had. It was a telling reaction. Abel stopped. "Get your hat," he said. "You're not welcome in your own shop today." Finch, seeing the cold, unblinking certainty in Abel's eyes, scrambled for his hat and scurried out the back entrance, leaving the key in the lock. Abel waited until the sound of his running footsteps faded, then he locked that door too. The shop was quiet again. He was alone with the silent, bleeding woman in the closet. He stood for a long moment, listening to the sound of his own breathing. Then he walked back to the closet and opened the door again. "It's all right," he said softly, though he wasn't sure if she could understand him. "He's gone." She didn't move, but her eyes, dark and full of a pain that went deeper than any bruise, opened and fixed on his face. The bargain had been struck, not with words or coin, but with the turning of a key. He did not press her. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy that spoke of a life spent in patient observation. He let the closet door stand open, allowing the dim light of the shop to spill in, but he did not enter her small, dark space. Instead, he turned and surveyed the shop, now their temporary sanctuary. It was a place of contained violence, tools for ending lives hanging neatly on the walls. Yet for now, it had to be a place of healing. He found a tin basin and a pump in the small back room where Finch must have lived and worked. He pumped water until the basin was half full, the rhythmic squeak of the handle the only sound. He found a rag that looked passably clean, folded near a small cot. He brought them back into the main room and set them on the floor, a careful distance from the closet. He did not look at her, but he was aware of her every breath, every tiny shift in the shadows. He was giving her time to see that he was not a threat, that his hands were here to mend, not to harm. After a few minutes of absolute stillness, he spoke again, his voice pitched low. "I'm not going to hurt you." He dipped the rag in the water and wrung it out. He held it up so she could see it. Just water. He took a single, slow step closer. She curled into herself, a reflexive, protective motion. He stopped immediately. He understood this language. It was a negotiation conducted in inches and silence. He set the damp cloth on the floor between them, a silent offering. Then he retreated, sitting on a low stool by the front counter, his back to her but his posture relaxed, non-threatening. He could feel her gaze on him, a palpable weight. He busied himself, checking the action on a Colt pistol, his movements methodical and calm. He was demonstrating his purpose. He was a man of tools, of quiet work. He was not a man of sudden violence, despite the gun at his hip. An hour passed. The sun beat down on the street outside, the sounds of the town muffled by the thick glass of the shop window. He did not move from his stool. Finally, he heard a rustle. He did not turn. He waited. A small, bare foot, bruised and dirty, appeared at the edge of the closet door. It hesitated, then retreated. A minute later, it appeared again. This time, a hand followed, reaching tentatively for the damp cloth. Her fingers, thin and trembling, closed around it. She drew it back into the darkness. He heard the soft sound of dabbing, a hissed intake of breath as the cool water touched her split lip or the cut on her temple. He remained facing forward, giving her the privacy of his turned back. He was building a bridge of trust, one small thing at a time. The first plank had just been laid. He waited for her to make the next move. He had jerky and a half-full canteen in his saddlebags. Sustenance. He knew she would need it, but knew too that leaving might break the fragile peace he was trying to build. He had to wait for her to show him she was ready. He could hear her breathing, a little less shallow now, a little more regular. The silence in the shop was no longer the tense, anxious thing it had been. It was changing, becoming a shared quiet, a space held between two wounded people. He wondered what her name was. Finch had called her Ling, but he suspected it was a name of convenience, a label slapped on her like a price tag. He wouldn't use it. He would wait until she gave him her own. Finally, when the light slanting through the front window had turned from gold to a dusty orange, she emerged fully from the closet. She moved like a wraith, silent on her bare feet. She stood in the middle of the room, holding the now soiled rag in her hands, looking at him. Her face was cleaner now, the blood wiped away, but the bruises stood out in stark relief, ugly purple and yellow maps of cruelty. Her eyes were ancient, holding a history he could only guess at. He met her gaze and held it, offering nothing but stillness. He was letting her see him, really see him, without the filter of fear. She took a hesitant step toward the basin, rinsed the rag with painstaking care, wrung it out, and folded it into a neat square, placing it beside the basin. It was a simple act, an imposition of order on a chaotic world. It was her first act of reciprocation, a quiet thank you that resonated more than any word. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. The second plank of the bridge was laid. He rose slowly from the stool. "I'm going to my horse," he said, his voice soft. "I'll be right back." "I'm not leaving," he pointed to the door, then to himself, then back into the room. He hoped she understood. He walked to the back door, unlocked it, and stepped out into the alley, leaving the door open so she could see him. His horse, a steady buckskin named Dust, nickered softly. He pulled his saddlebags, unstrapping the canteen and a leather pouch of dried meat. He didn't linger. He turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind him. She was exactly where he had left her, watching him, her body tense. He unscrewed the cap of the canteen and poured some water into a clean tin cup he found on Finch's workbench. He set it on the floor, next to where the basin had been. Then he took out a piece of jerky, broke off a small piece, and set it beside the cup. He retreated to his stool once more. He did not watch her eat. He gave her the dignity of her hunger, the space to satisfy a basic need without the shame of being observed. He ate his own portion slowly, staring out the front window as dusk settled over Redemption. He heard the soft scrape of the cup, the sound of swallowing. When he finally glanced over, the cup was empty and the small piece of jerky was gone. She had retreated to the mouth of her closet, not inside it, but near it. A small but significant change. She was no longer hiding, but she was not yet ready to occupy the open space. That was all right. He had time. The rifle could wait. The night deepened, wrapping the small gunsmith shop in a profound silence. Abel lit a single lantern, keeping the flame low. The light cast long, dancing shadows that made the racks of guns look like skeletal trees. He found a thick wool blanket on Finch's cot, shook it out, and placed it on the floor near the closet. Another offering, without word or expectation. For himself, he took a position on the floor by the front door, his back against the wall, his own worn bedroll serving as a thin cushion. It was the sentry's post. He was guarding the entrance, making it clear that nothing would get through that door without coming through him first. He laid his pistol on the floor beside him, within easy reach, but not in his hand. It was a statement of readiness, not of aggression. He tipped his hat over his eyes and settled in, not to sleep, but to wait. For hours, there was no sound but the gentle hiss of the lantern and the whisper of the night wind outside. He thought about the woman. He tried to piece together her story from the evidence of her body. The fresh bruises spoke of recent, casual brutality. The older, silvery scars on her arms and back, visible through the rents in her dress, told a longer, sadder tale. She had been in Finch's possession for some time. He thought of Finch's smooth, pleasant face and the coldness behind his eyes. It was a familiar kind of evil, the kind that cloaked itself in respectability, that called ownership help and cruelty discipline. He had seen it in boom towns and on lonely ranches, a poison that thrived in the shadows. His own past was a landscape of long shadows. He had once ridden away from a situation not unlike this one, telling himself it was not his fight. The memory was a burr under his saddle, a constant irritant. He would not ride away this time. Sometime after midnight, he heard a soft sound. The whisper of cloth on wood. He didn't move a muscle, his breathing remained deep and even. He watched from under the brim of his hat as she crept from the closet. She moved with a liquid grace, a ghost in the lantern light. She approached the blanket he had left for her, her eyes fixed on his still form. She stood over it for a long moment, then she picked it up. For a second, he thought she was rejecting it, taking it back to her dark corner. But she didn't. She walked silently toward him. He felt a knot of tension in his chest. His hand twitched toward his pistol. She stopped a few feet away. He could see her bare toes curl on the dusty floorboards. With a movement so gentle it was barely perceptible, she unfolded the blanket and draped it over him as he sat slumped against the door. The wool was warm and smelled faintly of cedar. It was an act of profound, startling care. A silent reciprocation that went far beyond folding a washcloth. She was seeing him not just as a protector, but as a person who might also feel the night's chill. She then retreated, not to the closet, but to a spot against the far wall, where she curled up on the hard floor, pulling her thin dress around her knees. She had given him the comfort she had been offered. In the shared vulnerability of that dark, quiet room, another plank, stronger than all the others, was laid across the chasm between them. He closed his eyes, the unexpected warmth of the blanket a shield against more than just the cold. The next morning brought the sun and the sounds of the town waking up. The rumble of a freight wagon, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Abel was awake before the first light, the blanket folded neatly beside him. He watched her as she slept, her face smoother in repose, the deep lines of fear and pain eased for a few precious hours. He moved quietly, pumping more water, getting the small stove in the back room going to boil water for coffee. He found a small stash of Finch supplies, coffee, flour, bacon. It felt like a small justice to use them. The smell of coffee and frying bacon soon filled the shop, a scent of domesticity at odds with the rows of firearms. The aroma woke her. She sat up, her eyes blinking in the morning light. He had already set a plate on a small crate for her, with a piece of bacon and a small, lopsided pancake he'd made in a skillet. He poured her a cup of coffee, adding a careful spoonful of sugar from Finch's tin. He drank his own standing by the window, watching the street. He was establishing a routine, a rhythm of normalcy. Food. Warmth. Safety. These were the only words they needed. She ate slowly, deliberately, as if memorizing the taste. When she was done, she brought the plate and cup to the basin and washed them. He turned from the window. "Thank you," he said. She looked up, startled to be addressed directly. She gave a small, jerky nod. Then she spoke, her voice a rough whisper, unused. "Thank you," she repeated, the words careful and accented. It was the first time she had mirrored his language. He felt something shift inside him, a thawing around a part of his heart he had long thought frozen solid. Later that morning, while she was tidying the already tidy back room, he decided to look more closely at Finch's workbench. Under a pile of receipts for gunpowder and lead shot, he found it. A ledger. He opened the worn leather cover. Most of it was standard inventory, meticulous entries for rifles, pistols, ammunition. But in the back, there was a different section. The handwriting was the same, but the entries were different. There were no names, only dates and sums. And notations. Laundry services and mending with the sums paid out were pitifully small. Then he saw another entry, repeated several times. Goods received, damaged. Beside each of these was a deduction from the already paltry sums. He ran a finger down the page. The dates corresponded to shipments that came in on the stagecoach from San Francisco. He was looking at a record of human trafficking, disguised as a business ledger. Finch wasn't just cruel. He was a predator, buying and selling people, marking them down like bruised fruit. The cold knot of anger in Abel's gut tightened. This was the proof. This was the weapon he would use, a weapon far more powerful than the gun at his hip. He closed the book. Now he had a story to tell, and the evidence to make it stick. The bell on the front door jangled, startling them both. Abel moved instantly, placing himself between the woman and the door, the ledger held tight in his hand. Through the glass, he saw the glint of a tin star. It was the town sheriff, a man with a weathered face and tired eyes. Behind him, looking smug and aggrieved, stood Finch. The survival crisis had arrived, not with a storm or a blizzard, but with the full weight of the law. "Open up, in there," the sheriff's voice boomed. "Mr. Finch here says you've taken over his property and are holding his indentured servant." Abel met the woman's eyes. He saw the terror flare back up, erasing the small progress they had made. He gave her a steady look. "Stay back," he murmured, then he unlocked the door. Sheriff Brody stepped inside, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. Finch scurried in behind him, pointing a trembling finger. "There! That's him! And he's got my girl in here." "Your girl?" Abel said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Is that what you call her?" "She's my property, lawfully contracted," Finch said, puffing out his chest. He produced a piece of paper, an indenture contract signed with an X. "She owes me 3 more years of service." Sheriff Brody looked from the paper to Abel, then past him to the woman cowering near the back wall. He saw her bruises. He was a man who had seen his share of trouble, and his eyes held a weary intelligence. "Son," he said to Abel, "this looks legal on the surface. You're a stranger here. Finch is a business owner. You need to explain yourself." This was the moment. Abel thought of his past, of the time he had walked away because the law was on the wrong side. "Not again." "I'm explaining," Abel said, holding up the ledger. "I believe this is Mr. Finch's business ledger. Perhaps you'd like to see the section where he logs payments for damaged goods." He opened it to the page and held it out. "He doesn't list a name, Sheriff. He lists merchandise. And he docks his own pay when he's the one who damages it." Finch's face went pale. That's private business." "Inventory. Is she inventory, Finch?" Abel pressed, his voice like steel. He didn't look at the sheriff. He looked at the woman. He spoke to her, his voice softening. "You can tell him. You don't have to be afraid anymore." All eyes turned to her. She was trembling, her hands clasped together. She looked at Finch, and the fear was there. But then she looked at Abel, at his steady presence, at the quiet promise of safety he had offered for the last day. She took a breath. And she spoke. Her English was broken, but her meaning was clear as glass. "He hit me," she said, her voice small but clear in the silent room. She pointed a finger at Finch. "Locking closet. No food." She looked at the sheriff, her dark eyes pleading. "Bad man." The simple, direct testimony of a child. It cut through all of Finch's legal papers and blustering denials. Sheriff Brody looked at the ledger in his hand, then at Finch's white, sweating face, then at the bruised woman. He was a man of the law, but he was also a man who knew truth when he saw it. He folded the indenture contract and tucked it into his pocket. "Finch," he said, his voice heavy. "I think you and I need to have a long talk down at my office." A very long talk. The respectable antagonist deflated, all his false confidence gone, exposed by a few quiet words and a column of numbers. As the sheriff led the sputtering gunsmith away, Abel locked the door once more. He turned to the woman. The immediate threat was gone. The shop was quiet again. But now a new, larger question hung in the air between them. What now? The afternoon shadows lengthened, and the shop grew quiet again. The drama was over, the antagonist removed from the board. But the silence that followed was different. It was heavy with unspoken questions. Abel stood by the counter, the rifle he had come for forgotten on the wall. He was a drifter. His life was in his saddlebags, his home the vast, empty spaces between towns. He had done what he felt was right, but his purpose here was finished. He could buy his rifle and ride on. That was the logical next step. That was the arithmetic of his life. He looked over at her. She was standing by the workbench, her hands tracing the grain of the wood. She was no longer cowering, but she seemed adrift, a ship whose anchor had just been cut. This shop, for all its horrors, had been her cage, her world. Now it was just a room full of tools, and she was a stranger in it, just as he was. His horse was waiting. The open road was waiting. It was what he knew. But the thought of leaving felt wrong, like a poorly balanced knife. It felt like walking away all over again. He saw his bedroll by the door, his hat, the few things that defined his existence. His pack bag, always ready. He had a choice to make. He could be the man who rode on, or he could be the man who stayed. He walked to the back room and picked up the tin cup she had used that morning. He pumped fresh water into it and brought it to her. She took it, her fingers brushing his. Her skin was cool. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice quiet. He had waited until the silence was the right kind of silence, one of peace, not fear. She looked up at him, her dark eyes searching his. She seemed to understand the weight of the question. It was not an order. It was a request. "Li Mai," she said, her voice soft but clear. Li Mai. It was a name like a small, beautiful bell. It had substance. It was hers. He nodded slowly. Abel. He had given her his name in return. An even trade. The final plank on the bridge was set, solid and sure. He looked around the shop, at the tools, the metal, the wood. It was a place for making and repairing things. Perhaps, he thought, a life could be repaired here, too. One small thing at a time. He walked to the front door, but he didn't unlock it. Instead, he reached for the closed sign. He took it down from the window and set it on the counter, face down. He would not be needing it. He turned back to her. A future he had never planned for was spooling out in front of him, uncertain but not empty. "I never did buy that rifle," he said, a hint of a smile touching his lips for the first time. Li Mai looked at the long guns on the wall, then back at him. She did not smile, but the deep, abiding fear in her eyes had been replaced by something else. A flicker of cautious hope. She gave a single, decisive nod, as if to say that the rifle was no longer the most important thing. He gestured to the two stools in the back room, by the small stove. An invitation. She hesitated for only a second, then walked toward them and Saturday. Abel followed, taking the seat opposite her. The space between them was no longer a chasm of fear and mistrust, but the simple space between two people at a table, ready to share a meal, or a silence, or the beginning of a new day. He had come to redemption to buy a weapon, a tool for survival. He had found a reason to stay instead. Thank you for watching.